I want you to close your eyes for a moment. Actually, don't close them. Keep watching. But I want you to picture something. Picture two people. Both born in the same kind of neighborhood. Both went to similar schools. Both got jobs around the same time. Both earn roughly the same salary every single month. From the outside, their lives look almost identical. But now fast forward. 10 years into the future. One of them owns a home. Not a dream, an actual home, with their name on the title deed. They have money sitting in a savings account. Not a fortune, but enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to handle an emergency without panic. Enough to sleep at night without that quiet, nagging fear that most people carry with them into the darkness every single evening. They wake up in the morning and money is not the first thing they worry about. Now look at the second person. 10 years later, they are still starting from zero every single month. Still asking the same questions. Where did it go? Why is there never enough? Why does it feel like no matter how hard I work, I end up in the same place? Same city. Same salary. Same 10 years. Completely different lives. Now, if you asked most people on the street to explain this difference, they would give you the same answers. Discipline. Hard work. Intelligence. Maybe luck. Maybe the right connections. Maybe being born into the right family. And maybe, just maybe, some of those things play a small role. But what if I told you that none of those things are actually the real reason? What if the true explanation goes somewhere most people have never looked? Not into their bank account. Not into their salary. Not into their spending habits on the surface. But deep into the human mind. Into the invisible programming that runs beneath every financial decision you have ever made, decisions you thought were yours, but were actually made for you, long before you ever earned your first coin. What you are about to hear is not a list of tips. It is not 5 steps to save money. It is something far more important than that. It is the truth about why the financial gap between people exists, and it has almost nothing to do with money itself. Stay with me. Because by the end of this, you will never look at wealth or poverty the same way again. Let us start with science. Because what researchers have discovered about the relationship between poverty and the human brain is one of the most important and most ignored findings of the last 30 years. In 2013, a team of researchers from Princeton University and Harvard published a study that would quietly change the way we understand poverty forever. They wanted to answer one simple question: why do people who are struggling financially so often make decisions that seem to make their situation worse? Why does someone who cannot afford something still spend money on it? Why does a person drowning in debt somehow take on more debt? Is it poor character? Is it stupidity? Is it a lack of willpower? The answer was none of those things. What they discovered is that when a human being is under constant financial pressure, when the mind is consumed with worry about rent, about food, about survival, the brain enters a state that scientists now call cognitive scarcity. And in this state, something measurable happens. Your working memory, the part of your brain that handles complex thinking, planning, and decision-making, becomes overloaded. Not because you are using it poorly, but because it is already full. Full of fear. Full of calculations. Full of the constant mental arithmetic of survival. How much is in the account? Will the salary come before the rent is due? If I pay this bill, can I still afford food this week? What happens if the car breaks down? What happens if someone gets sick? These are not small thoughts. These are heavy, grinding, exhausting thoughts that run in the background of a struggling person's mind every single hour of every single day. And the researchers found that carrying this mental load, This weight of financial anxiety effectively reduces a person's cognitive capacity by the equivalent of losing 13 IQ points. 13 points. To put that in perspective, that is more than the cognitive impact of going an entire night without sleep. So the person who is struggling financially is not just dealing with less money. They are dealing with less mental capacity to solve the very problem they are facing. Think about how cruel that is for a moment. The less money you have, the harder it becomes to think clearly about money. The harder it is to think clearly, the worse your financial decisions become. The worse your decisions, the less money you have. It is a loop. A biological, psychological loop, and nobody ever told you it existed. This is not about intelligence. Some of the most brilliant people in the world are trapped in this loop right now. Because it does not discriminate based on how smart you are. It discriminates based on how much financial pressure you are under. And the most heartbreaking part? The people who most need to make good financial decisions are the ones whose brains are most compromised by the pressure of their situation. Not by choice. Not by character. By biology. Now let us bring this out of the laboratory and into real life. Into your life. Into the life of someone you know. Because the cognitive scarcity we just talked about does not stay as an abstract concept. It shows up in a very specific, very recognizable pattern. A pattern so common that billions of people live inside it right now without even realizing it. Economists and psychologists call it the poverty trap. I call it the hamster wheel. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Here is how it works. Money arrives. A salary. A payment. Some income. And the moment it arrives, before it has even had time to settle, the mind, operating in survival mode, immediately begins scanning. What is most urgent right now? What crisis is closest? What fire needs to be put out today? The rent that is 3 days overdue. The electricity bill that came with a warning. The school fees that have been carrying over for 2 months. The borrowed money from a friend that has started creating awkwardness at family gatherings. And so the money moves. Quickly. Purposefully. Solving today's problems with today's money. And then it is gone. And the person is left standing in the same place they were before payday. Maybe slightly relieved. But only slightly. Because they know, without even having to think about it, that next month will look exactly the same. Because it always does. So they work harder. They take extra shifts. They hustle on the side. They sacrifice weekends. They sacrifice rest. They sacrifice time with people they love. They pour more and more energy into the wheel. And more money comes in. And it goes out just as fast. Because the wheel is not powered by how much you earn. The wheel is powered by how you are programmed to relate to money. And here is the part that most financial advice completely misses. Telling someone on the hamster wheel to just save more is like telling someone who is drowning to just swim better. The advice is not wrong. But it completely ignores the situation the person is actually in. When your brain is in survival mode, saving does not feel like building for the future. It feels like gambling with today's survival. It feels dangerous. It feels irresponsible. Because what if something goes wrong next week and that money is locked away? And so the money stays liquid. Stays accessible. Stays available for the next crisis. Which always comes. Because when you are not building, you are always one emergency away from starting over completely. This is the wheel. And the wheel keeps turning. Not because the person running on it is lazy or foolish or without ambition. But because nobody ever showed them the door off the wheel. Nobody ever said, the problem is not how fast you are running. The problem is that you are running at all. Now I need to say something that might be uncomfortable. Not because it is meant to blame anyone, but because it is true. And uncomfortable truths, when you are finally willing to hear them, are the ones that actually change your life. Look around you. Not literally right now. But think about the people who fill your daily world. Your closest friends. The family members you spend the most time with. Your neighbors. Your colleagues. The people whose lives you follow on social media. The conversations you find yourself in every single week. Because those people, that environment, is actively shaping your financial behavior in ways you are almost certainly not aware of. Psychologists have studied this for decades. And what they have found, over and over again, is that human beings are profoundly, almost helplessly influenced by the behavior of those around them. We call it social conformity. But it runs far deeper than just wanting to fit in. For hundreds of thousands of years, human survival depended on being part of a group. Being accepted. Being one of the tribe. And the fastest way to be rejected from the tribe, the most dangerous thing a human could do for most of our existence on this planet, was to behave differently from everyone else. That instinct is still in you. Right now. Today. In a world that looks nothing like the one it evolved for. So when everyone around you upgrades their phone every year, your brain registers that as normal. Expected. What people do. When everyone in your circle goes out every weekend and spends freely and talks about money as something to enjoy, not something to protect, your brain registers that as normal. When the culture around you says that the way you show success is through what you wear, what you drive, what phone you carry, where you are seen, your brain absorbs that as the rulebook for how the world works. And it plays by that rulebook automatically. And when you try to break from that pattern, when you try to save instead of spend, when you try to invest instead of impress, when you try to quietly build while others loudly consume, something deeply uncomfortable happens. You feel like an outsider. You feel like you are missing out on something. You feel the subtle, persistent pressure of friends who joke about your sudden stinginess. The family member who says you have changed. The quiet social cost of being the one who does things differently from everyone around you. And most people, eventually cave. Not because they are weak, but because the psychological cost of being different from your environment is genuinely, physically painful. It is not a character flaw. It is evolution. Working exactly as it was designed to. But here is what that means practically, and this is important. If you are surrounded by people who spend every coin they earn, statistically, you will too. Not always. Not in every single case. But the gravitational pull of your environment is enormous. Far more powerful than most people ever give it credit for. Your environment is either an accelerator or an anchor. And most people have never once stopped to honestly ask themselves which one theirs is. We have talked about the brain. We have talked about the wheel. We have talked about the environment. But now we go to the deepest layer. The one that sits underneath all of it. The root beneath the root. And I want you to listen to this very carefully. Because this is the part that most people have never heard spoken out loud. And it is the part that, if you truly absorb it, will explain more about your financial life than anything else I could ever say to you. The deepest reason most people stay in financial struggle has nothing to do with money. It has to do with identity. Identity is the story you carry about who you are. Not the story you tell other people. Not the version of yourself you present to the world. The story you tell yourself. In the quiet moments. In the private conversations that happen inside your own mind when no one else is listening. And for a person who grew up in financial scarcity, that story was written a very long time ago. Before you had any say in it. Before you even had the language to question it. It was written in the way your parents talked about money, or refused to talk about it altogether, as if it were too painful or too shameful to name. It was written in the exhaustion you saw on their faces at the end of a hard month. in the things you wanted but could not have, in the feeling, never spoken aloud, but deeply felt in your bones, that wealth was something that existed in a different world. A world that belonged to other kinds of people. And so somewhere along the way, not consciously, not deliberately, a belief took root deep inside you. Money is not for people like me. Maybe it sounded like, we are not the kind of family that has savings. Maybe it sounded like, rich people are just lucky, or they did something dishonest to get there. Maybe it sounded like, I could never actually be financially free. That is for someone else. Not for me. These beliefs feel like observations. Like simple, neutral facts about how the world works. But they are not facts. They are stories. And stories, no matter how real they feel, no matter how long you have been carrying them, are not the same as reality. They are filters. Lenses through which you interpret every opportunity, every decision, every outcome that comes your way. And here is the terrifying, extraordinary power of identity. Your brain, every single waking hour of every single day, is working to make sure that your life matches your identity. It is a process called cognitive consistency. And it operates almost entirely below the level of conscious thought, completely out of your awareness. So if your identity says I am not someone who has money, your brain will find ways to make that true. Quietly. Invisibly. Without your permission. You will get a raise and find new ways to spend it before you have even decided to. You will start saving, and then an emergency will appear that feels completely legitimate and justifies using it all. You will get close to a real financial breakthrough, and you will pull back from it. Unconsciously. Because deep down, success feels like a lie. Like becoming someone your identity does not recognize or trust. Psychologists call this self-sabotage. But it is not sabotage in the way we usually imagine it. It is the mind protecting the identity it was built around. The brain doing its job, keeping you consistent with who it believes you are. And no amount of budgeting advice, no savings app, no financial plan in the world will work long-term if the identity underneath is still running the old story. Because the identity always wins. Always. Until the day you decide, consciously, deliberately, with full awareness and full courage, to write a new one. So now you know. You know about the cognitive scarcity that hijacks the brain under financial pressure and quietly reduces your capacity to solve the very problem you are facing. You know about the hamster wheel of survival thinking that keeps millions of people working harder without moving forward. You know about the invisible environmental programming that shapes your spending and your standards without ever asking for your permission. And you know about the identity, the deepest, most powerful, most invisible force of all, that keeps the ceiling in place no matter how hard someone pushes against it from below. And I imagine that sitting with all of this might bring up two very different feelings at the same time. One feeling might be relief. Finally, an explanation that does not start and end with blame. Finally, a reason that makes sense. That honors the reality of how genuinely, structurally difficult this all is. That tells you the truth without making you feel ashamed of where you are. But the other feeling, and I want to be honest with you about this, might be something closer to hopelessness. If all of this is biological. If it is baked into the environment you grew up in. If it is identity built up across decades of lived experience, then what can actually change? Is this just who some people are? Is this simply how some lives go? And the answer, with everything that science, psychology, and human history has shown us, is a clear, definitive, and beautiful no. Because the most important discovery about the human brain is not that scarcity can limit it. The most important discovery is that the brain can change. Scientists call it neuroplasticity, the brain's remarkable, lifelong ability to form new connections, build new habits, and rewire patterns that have existed for years or even decades. Your brain is not a finished product. It was never meant to be finished. It is alive. It is responsive. And it responds, powerfully and measurably, to what you consistently choose to feed it. The environment that shaped you, you can redesign it. Not all at once. Not without friction. But deliberately, intentionally, one decision at a time. You can be selective about who you spend time with. You can change what you read, what you listen to, what you allow into your mind every day. You can seek out people who are building quietly and let their normal slowly become yours. And the identity, the story that has been running quietly beneath your life like a river you never knew was there, that story is not set in stone. Stories are written by human minds. And what a human mind writes, a human mind can rewrite. Not overnight. Not without the old story fighting back. Not without moments where the wheel starts turning again and you have to consciously choose to step off it one more time. But it can be done. It has been done. By people who started with far less than you have. By people who understood far less than what you now understand, right now, in this moment. Because right now, you have something most people never receive. You have awareness. And awareness is not a small thing. It is not just a first step. Awareness is everything. Because you cannot change what you cannot see. You cannot escape a trap you do not know you are in. But the moment you can see it, clearly, honestly, without flinching, you are no longer simply inside it. You are standing at the edge of it, looking in. And from that position, for the very first time, you have a genuine choice. The journey from where you are to where you want to be does not begin with a bigger salary. It does not begin with a lucky break. It begins exactly here. In this moment. With this understanding. The root of wealth has never been money. It has always been the mind that knows how to grow it. You are not poor because you are lazy. You are not struggling because you are not smart enough. You are not where you want to be because of bad luck or weak character or some personal failing that you need to carry as shame. You are where you are because you were handed a set of invisible tools, tools shaped by your biology, your upbringing, your environment, your identity, and nobody ever showed you how those tools work. Nobody ever told you that some of them were quietly working against you. Nobody ever handed you a map and said, here is what is actually happening. Here is why. And here is where the door is. But now you have a map. Not a complete one. Not all the answers, no single video could ever give you that. But something real. Something honest. Something true. A beginning. And real beginnings, genuine ones, are rarer than most people ever realize. This is WealthRootMind. This channel exists for one reason, to go to the root. Not the surface. Not the shortcuts. Not the generic advice that sounds good and changes nothing. The root. The deep, honest, sometimes uncomfortable, always necessary truth about why we think about money the way we do, and what it actually takes, from the inside out, to change. If something in this video moved something in you, if something landed in a place you were not expecting, share it. With a friend. With a family member. With someone you care about who you know is running on the wheel right now and does not yet have the words to explain why they feel stuck. Because this kind of knowledge, it does not just change individuals. It changes families. It changes what children grow up believing is possible for them. It changes communities, one person at a time. Subscribe. Because every video on this channel goes deeper. In the next video, we go into the emotional reason you cannot stop spending. Even when you know you should not. Even when part of you genuinely wants to stop. What is really driving it? And what it reveals about something far more important than your bank balance. That one will surprise you. The root of wealth is never money. It is always, always, the mind. We will see you in the next one.